to Black Light Mass Incarceration Show. I am your host, Sierra Cobb. Black Light Mass Incarceration Show is a space that is used to uplift the unheard voices of the criminal and social justice issues that many face today. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoy.
Hi, Sierra. I didn't realize I was muted.
Hi, Eric. How are you?
I'm doing fine. I'm going to blur my background, which I've never done before, but maybe
You go to where it says stop video and or where the video is, and then
videos era.
press the up button, and it should give you an option to blur your
Oh,
screen.
perfect. Does that look all right for your
Yeah,
recording? Okay,
yeah.
good. Uh, so I've been running around this morning. How's your Friday going?
Going pretty good. I just got off.
Yeah, good. Good. So went from working to this, huh?
Yeah. Yep, straight here.
Well, thank you for your interest in our work. I'm looking forward to our conversation today. And
Thank
yeah,
you. Thank you for reaching out. Wanting Black Light to be a part of this conversation.
well, great. Well, yeah, I'm ready whenever you are. I'll follow your lead.
Okay. Well, I asked Taj to send me like a write-up of what we'll be talking about, but I didn't get it. But I guess you could just kind of introduce about yourself and then kind of what you all do and the purpose of what you guys do.
Sure. So my name's Eric Seiferth. I'm curator historian at the Historic New Orleans Collection. I have been there for 15 years, and consider myself a public historian, meaning I share our collective history with the public. Our museum is free. We have a museum space, a research center where we make all of our collections available to the public, and a publishing wing. And we tell stories, about the history and culture of New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. Um, and that can include a lot of different things. I've worked in the past on exhibitions on the civil rights movement, on second lines in New Orleans, on overview histories, um, and what brought us together today is our current exhibition, which is called Captive State: Louisiana and the Making of Mass Incarceration. And this is an exhibition that we've been working on, has been in the works for about half a dozen years. And it looks at the 300-year history of punishment and incarceration in Louisiana from the colonial era up to today. And Louisiana is one of the most, if not the most incarcerated place in the world. Um, Best estimates place it the number in terms of incarceration rate at about one person per 100 in Louisiana is currently incarcerated. Um, that's much higher than in the United States as a whole. And the United States as a whole is one of the most incarcerated countries in the world. So we wanted to go backwards to try to better understand how that came to be. And there are a lot of threads we follow, but perhaps the main one, or the main one, is this connection between system of slavery and the systems of mass incarceration today. And there's a clear link. And so we follow that kind of historical connection in our galleries.
Okay. Yeah. That is true. I know North Carolina has increased their population for incarceration. Looking at the numbers, we are currently at a population where we should be in 2027 So that's more indicators that we are currently starting to incarcerate more people here in North Carolina. And that just seems like a thing that they do a lot in the South is to incarcerate for, just free labor. I know when I looked at some of the numbers last year, I think North Carolina made over 1 million on correctional enterprises. And for us, correctional enterprises is, where the people incarcerated makes all of the supplies that they sell, to different companies
Hmm.
and corporations. So that's a lot of money that they've made off of people that are enslaved, as well as, only paying them maybe 25 cents. I think the highest job is maybe a few dollars. It's not much. So, it goes to show you that the South has always lived on slavery since back in the days with the cotton fields and, um, you know, keeping people enslaved to get free labor to make money for the wealthy. And so it's really important that we continue to, bring this to light that incarceration has nothing to do with rehabilitation or correction. It's all about the money and how much money they can make off of free labor and not having to pay, labor like they do when we have a everyday 9 to 5 job. And so I know we do have an organization in North Carolina that's currently trying to work on drafting a bill that would end the slavery. And I know Louisiana didn't y'all have that bill as well?
There is some, it may be the same one or a similar one, to stop the farm line at Angola,
Hmm.
which is the field, forced field labor
Hmm.
at the plantation there. Um, that is, has been is before the courts now, and it may be the same one. I know that it was done in conjunction with a few other states.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's the one that we're also working on as well, to kind of end slavery. But I think Tennessee had a bill like that as well. But I'm hearing that even though they have that bill, slavery is still, continuing to thrive inside of the prisons. And it's mighty funny that you said that because a few months ago, back in October, we actually had the old warden come from Angola, that used to be the warden of Angola, come and kind of talk about how he changed the way that the prison operated and how the correctional officers treated the people incarcerated, and showed this video of the jobs and things that he brought to Angola and how he changed it. So I thought that was crazy how you brought that up. But yeah, so tell us a little bit more of like what are your efforts? Like how are you going back to track um, slavery and
Yeah.
incarceration?
Yeah, so I can give you a little bit of the history that's in our exhibition. Yet, like I said, starts with the colonial era in Louisiana, which for us we go back to 1724. The city of New Orleans is founded in 1718 by the French, but in 1724 the French institute a set of laws targeting enslaved people and people of African descent, as well as a few religious minorities, known as the Code Noir.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is something the French do across their colonies. But the specific one for Louisiana was brought in 1724. And the laws lay out uh, a set of crimes and punishments, like I said, for enslaved people and free people of African descent as well. And you really see from the beginning there that this state and city is founded on a colonial structure. And you break that down, it's founded on a slave system based on white supremacy. That's what that document really reinforces. Um, and that takes us into the story. Um, the Code Noir does a couple other things. It shows, it illustrates really clearly the violence and history of violence towards incarcerated people, um, and as a form of punishment, from the beginning in New Orleans. So at that point in time, most of the punishments, especially um, directed towards enslaved people, uh, were were acts of violence or physical torture. So things like branding, dismemberment, physical torture until death in the public sphere, so in public. And we see that theme go from that moment through to today, violence being directed by the state towards people in its custody. In Louisiana, we have the death penalty. This is a form of violence directed towards its citizens from the state. The labor story really hits in the Spanish era for us in New Orleans and Louisiana, and that's the late 18th century. So the 1760s to about 1800, you see the city of New Orleans expands greatly, and most of that work is done, and by work I mean street building, street maintenance, levees are important for us. We're on the river. Those levees are built and maintained all by forced or coerced labor. And largely that means enslaved people or incarcerated people that are also enslaved. You have kind of these three categories doing the bulk of the work. And that, again, like the theme of violence meted out by the state against its own citizens stays through to today. You mentioned labor in North Carolina. I don't know much about that system, but in Louisiana, DOC partners with a group called Prison Enterprises, which is a public-private organization or institution of some kind that makes money off of materials and goods being made by people at the 8 prisons in the state.
Ours is the same thing. It's called correctional enterprises.
Correctional enterprises. Yeah, that's when I heard that. I said, "Oh, that I'm familiar with that." And people that incarcerated in Louisiana are forced to labor, and the entry point is 2 cents an hour. And if you are sent to Louisiana State Penitentiary, which is Angola, the plantation, you are forced to begin your first duty post, where you're assigned to work, is the field. So you have to work in the fields first for 2 cents an hour. And then you may be able to move to a different job, none of which pay over 20 cents an hour. So, and that money, it's important to note, is not given to you in checks. It is not cash that is easily accessible. There are lots of restrictions against use of that money. So for example, you have to accrue a certain amount of money, which I believe is $200 or $300 before you can access the money. You have to be in DOC for a set number of years before you can access the money. And meanwhile, if you have a sick call or need to see the doctor, they may take money out of your account. So not only is it a minuscule amount of money, but not everyone is even receiving the money in any meaningful way. We see that start in the Spanish era, and it really explodes in the early American era. So in about 200 years ago, 1820s, 1840s era, a lot of enslaved people are being forced to move from your neck of the woods, from North Carolina, Virginia, Chesapeake Bay region, and they're being sold to work on plantations processing sugar and cotton in places like Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama. And this huge forced migration of people underpinned the entire economic system of the United States. And New Orleans was the largest market for the sale of people 200 years ago. So at that moment, while that's happening, we see that systems of incarceration are being developed to support and prop up this slave system that is exploding in New Orleans. So these two systems grow hand in hand. They rely on each other. We see systems of policing and jails that are coming out of the Caribbean and coming to New Orleans as a way to maintain these systems. So the first municipal police force in New Orleans starts in 1805. That same year, the city opens its first police jail, and the police jail in New Orleans is a place for the city to incarcerate enslaved people. Either mostly enslaved people have escaped and been captured. They're sent extrajudiciously to the police jail and forced to labor for the city, or enslaved people are sent there by an enslaver for the purpose of punishment so that they don't have to do it. So they could send somebody there and they would pay the city for that service. The third category are free people of African descent, free people of color, of which there were a lot in New Orleans, that were misidentified as escaped enslaved people and sent to police jails and forced to labor. And there was not an insignificant number of these folks too. There's a few hundred a year over this era that are stuck in these police jails. If you're a free person of color in New Orleans, you have little recourse. You have freedom papers and you have affidavits, hopefully of people that know you that can speak to your freedom, but it's very difficult to prove that after being, incarcerated by the state. And it was not uncommon for freedom papers to be ripped up and people to be sent to the police jail. There's a fourth category that we see of people that are free that's coming in later in closer to the Civil War, of free Black sailors coming in from the North, largely, who are, New Orleans is a major port city, who are coming into New Orleans. And the state enacts what they call the Negro Sailors Act and Seamen's Act, excuse me, and basically are arresting any Black sailors as soon as they get off their boat and putting them in police jails as a way to keep the idea of Black freedom out of view. They don't want free people of color in the city because they fear that it'll inspire enslaved people of color to escape or fight back, etc. So they go to the police jail too. And there are lots of cases of people who are stuck in the police jail for months or years who can't get out because they can't get a white person to vouch for their freedom, which is basically you need custodianship of a white person essentially to leave the police jail. So that was a long explanation, but that happens in this era, and I'll try to do this a little bit faster, but the police jail is rebranded as the city workhouse after the Civil War. Then they rebranded again as the police jail because the city workhouse has a bad reputation. Then they call it the House of Detention. Then they get rid of the House of Detention. Well, in 1967, the city builds a new jail called the House of Detention. And there's a direct linkage between these facilities going back to 1805 in terms of them being spaces for the city to force people to labor. And prior to the war in police jails, it's people of color of African descent, largely enslaved. And it goes from entirely that at the police jail to not entirely that, but predominantly that as you go forward and up into the 20th century. New Orleans is also at the same moment the place through which the chain gang comes into the United States. So the chain gang is something we are familiar with as Americans. We've heard about it. There are movies featuring it. It's in songs, right? This is like a popularized cultural thing. Like we know what it is, right? It comes into the United States, we think, from the Caribbean through New Orleans in about 1815 or so. And what it is a system where enslaved men and women in the police jail are taken to labor on streets in the city wearing chains um, as a form of punishment and as a way for the city to maintain itself. So you're seeing streets built, gutters cleaned, levees built. Even the jail itself is built and maintained by people on the chain gang. And, we have in the exhibition the first known image of a chain gang in North America, in the United States, and it dates to 1820. It's a lithograph. And next to it, we have a day book from a city surveyor in New Orleans, which is, this big old book, this pretty handwriting in it that has an entry for each day of all the work going on in the city for infrastructure. And every day there's a mention of the chain gang, who's there and what they're doing. So it was a very integral part of New Orleans life in this part of the this part of its history, the mid 19th century. You would have seen the chain gang working. You would have known about the chain gang. It was made to be seen. It was made to reinforce this white supremacist society that is growing up with the slave system.
So I got a question. Is there any research on why it was people of the African descent? Because we know that, the Europeans did sail over to Africa, and, there's stories whether Africa sold us to the Europeans or whether, they just basically said, we're going to take these people and, put them on this big ship and ship them over here to America and take the Indians' land and, make it what we want. So is there any research on from the time that we were put on that boat to get over here and how the Europeans were able to overtake a whole continent that was not theirs? Because I do know from some of the research that I did that there were some Black slaves already over here that were working with the Indians. And then some of them were able to take their slaves when they moved them to the north. But a lot of them wasn't able to go. They, of course, took them as well. But is there any research on, why the Europeans decide to sail from different continents to, they go to Africa and then take, Africans and bring them over here and then basically have them build to where we are now? Yeah.
Yes. The question is yes. The answer to the question is yes. There's been a lot of work done on this, what is widely referred to now as Atlantic history, just what is happening in the connections between the Americas, Africa, and Europe, especially during this time. The Europeans are also enslaving indigenous populations, and indigenous populations are also enslaving other indigenous populations. In Africa, there's also slavery going on. So this is the kind of environment that of that era. The Europeans have some technological advantages that are allowing them to essentially move an enormous population of forced migration of people from Africa to the Americas and force them to labor. I am not an expert in that history, so I don't want to give any information that's not accurate. But this is something that in academic circles of historians right now is a question that a lot of people are and have been asking for the last couple decades, is trying to get to the root of this system and what exactly was going on and why. By the time our story starts in New Orleans with incarceration, there's been a few centuries of enslavement in North America with Europeans and Africans. So and like I said, the Code Noir is a document that the Louisiana version is published in 1724 or becomes law in 1724, but the French crown has used this this set of laws, the Code Noir, for different places that they have colonized and have um, instituted African slavery in for decades prior to that. So, I like I said, I don't want to give any bad information on kind of that part of it, but that is out there. People have that question, and it is one that people are answering now too.
So let's talk about the 13th Amendment, because the 13th Amendment has a lot to do with slavery now and incarceration. It says that slavery was abolished. Well, chattel slavery was abolished, except for when you commit a crime. And so therefore slavery still stands if you commit a crime. And so that's why we have a lot of the bills that you see that came out, the 94 crime bill, the habitual felon bill and things like that, that basically cause incarceration population to boom because they was no longer able to legally just slave people, chattel slave people. So they moved it from that to moving it to incarceration. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how the U.S. Constitution plays an issue and a part in incarceration, especially today.
Yeah, I think it's important that it's an important point. Slavery is uh, addressed in the United States Constitution via the 13th Amendment, um, which happens after the Civil War, after the Emancipation Proclamation. And what it says is that neither slavery or involuntary servitude is going to exist in this country. Again, that's over with, except for those duly convicted of a crime. So, putting that a different way, slavery still is constitutionally allowed in the United States for people that have been convicted of a crime. What we see in Louisiana, and this is something that happens across the South right after the war and after the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, all of which address slavery and citizenship, is the proliferation of a convict lease system. In Louisiana, what that means is in 1870, just after these amendments are passed, the state sells the right to the custodianship of all people convicted of a felony to an individual. And in this case, they sell it to a former Confederate officer, and his name is Samuel James. And he operates what we call the lease for the next 30 years. So in other words, he operates the prison system in Louisiana for the next 30 years. There's really no oversight, and he uses the prison population entirely as a plantation owner prior to the war might have used a population of enslaved people. In fact, the mortality rate of people in the James lease, people incarcerated during the James lease, is higher than you would expect to see in a slave plantation prior to the Civil War. And we see this a lot in the lease system that postdates the war. And the owners of these and operators of these leases are pretty matter of fact about it. And what they say basically is there's no financial incentive, set aside humanity and ethics. There's no financial incentive in keeping anybody alive because the states are creating mechanisms by which they can incarcerate people and force them to work at such an increased level that there's a huge workforce for these people that are operating the prisons in the South during the post-war era. So basically, there's a really clear and strong continuation of forced labor, predominantly of Black men in the South during this lease system. It's not entirely. There are a lot of Black women as well. The best estimates we've been able to see demographic wise for the James lease is about 75% of people incarcerated at that time were Black, which is much higher than it was prior to the Civil War, and of course, much higher than the general population demographics of the state. There's a direct connection there between what's going on today at Angola, which I think is part of your question, and that the space where Samuel James is operating his lease and forcing people to labor. And there's not even 2 cents at this point for the people being forced to labor. There's nothing. There's the hope of survival. He has purchased a series of plantations on the Mississippi River in 1880 from the estate of this guy, Isaac Franklin, who was the largest slave trader in the United States at one point of time. So Isaac Franklin owns these series of about a half dozen plantations on the Mississippi River. They eventually go after the war to Samuel James, this ex-Confederate officer who operates the prison system for the state of Louisiana. When he passes away, and when the lease expires in 1900, the state of Louisiana takes over operation of these. And in about 1916 or so, they make those plantations the Louisiana State Penitentiary, the site of the Louisiana State Penitentiary. And these plantations are collectively known as the Angola plantations. So there's a direct link of forced labor, predominantly of Black men, on this site, where today that's happening and people are being paid, if anything, 2 cents an hour, to the 1830s when enslaved people were forced to labor on this same site. And the 13th Amendment does little to stop the forced labor of Black Louisianians on this space and in this for the benefit of people like Samuel James and later the state of Louisiana.
Right. How do you see Louisiana? I know you have some policies or have a policy that you're trying to get passed to kind of ease slavery, but I know I read that the governor has signed in or is planning to sign in or has signed in where they're making people do more time. So they're going to be keeping people longer. So it's like we're going back in the circle of, we're going to incarcerate people for the rest of their lives. And we're going to punish them even more. So how do you see this? Like, how do you see that fight going? Like, do you see as, you're going to be able to get the policies passed, or do you feel like it's just going to be an ongoing fight to change the landscape of slavery and enslaving people, especially through incarceration, as we continue to go? Because, as we see more, now we're seeing more and more police killings of Black people for no reason. I've heard rumors about that's the way they want to get the economy back jumping, is to start enslaving people, even free people to, get the economy jumping like they did back in the early 1800s. So what is your take on that?
Yeah. What you see, when you look backwards can kind of give you an idea of things as you look forwards, right? Talking about learning from the past, and things tend to move cyclically. There's often, as society changes in one direction, perhaps the abolishment of most forms of slavery, you see it push back in another, like the drafting of the 1898 Louisiana State Constitution, which was written to negate any gains made for civil rights of Black Louisianians through Reconstruction. So this Constitution we call the Jim Crow Constitution. And we have a quote on the wall in the exhibition from Thomas J. Semmes, who's the chairman of the judiciary of the Constitutional Convention for the writing of this state constitution. And he says that their primary goal is to maintain the supremacy of the white race. That's the goal of the drafters of this Constitution. It is not in doubt. It is not, ambiguous. He's very explicit. This is what they're trying to do. So you see these things wax and wane. And, when we started this project, for example, was shortly after 2017. And in Louisiana in 2017, there were a series of criminal legal reform acts that went before the state government that had bipartisan support and were signed into law by the governor at the time. And they did a lot to reduce the population, the incarcerated population in the state. That's kind of where we were when this project started. We have seen things change from then to where we are today, where the rhetoric of tough on crime, which was used in the 70s, 80s, and 90s for politicians to win votes, has returned. And it has returned to, and led to legislative changes in Louisiana. We had a crime session in the beginning of 2024 that the governor called to address crime, what he says, the crime situation in Louisiana. And they passed a number of bills that look and sound and read very similar to those that were passed in the 70s, 80s, and 90s that we know from the data, from looking back at history of what happens after those are passed, that they result in a huge increase in the number of people being incarcerated. People are being incarcerated and sentenced to more people are being incarcerated for longer amounts of time. That's kind of the simplest way to put it, right? We're sending more people to jail for longer. It's during this era in the 70s that parole in Louisiana is abolished for life sentences. So before 1972 in Louisiana, a life sentence had parole eligibility after 10 years and 6 months. By the end of that decade, people that receive a life sentence have no parole eligibility. So if you receive a life sentence, it means you will be in prison until you are no longer alive. One of the ramifications of that change in terms of incarceration is that we see prior to that rule about under 200 people serving a life sentence in the state prison. We see in 2020, there are about 4,500 people serving life sentences in Louisiana because we've enlarged the number of crimes that can require a life sentence, and we don't let anybody come home that receives a life sentence. Again, historically, if you look at the data, New Orleans is not a safer place because of these legislative changes. We know that. The data points to over the last 20 years, since 2000, violent crime has gone down in Louisiana, a not insignificant amount. I think it's something like 10 or 20%. During that same period of time, incarceration has increased, I think, by about 8%. So it is not clear that incarcerating more people for longer has a societal benefit of making us safer. Historically, that has not proven to be the case. Now, what will happen in the future, that's not really for me to say, but I can look back and you can see in our exhibition, that mass incarceration did not make the city and state and country any safer.
And I don't think that it ever will. If you go back all the way then until now, it has never deterred crime. It has never lowered crime. And I don't think that it ever will. It's just a mask that they use to enslave people to get free slavery out of people. It will never be a deterrent. It will never be anything that will stop, crime. And that's every state. Everybody has data where it's saying that incarceration has never deterred any violent crimes. And so, we have reports and data of saying that a lot of states violent crimes have decreased, but then you have certain politicians that come back and say, well, that data is a lie, especially when you see certain things going on in the city and they'd be like, well, this is why the Democrats are wanting y'all to believe that, but that's not true because ABC has happened. And so, I think that's just another way, like I said, to mask what they're really trying to do and what they really want to do, which is to continue slavery until the end of time. Um, and it's pretty sad. So, what long-term impacts do you see of incarceration? Because I know in every state, we're starting to see where a lot of prisons don't have staff. They're not able to attain staff, keep staff or hire staff. And so you're incarcerating more people, but then yet still you don't have anybody there to watch them because, I mean, we're in 2024. A lot of the people that they are hiring are Gen Zs and Gen Xs, and they're just not okay with enslaving people and treating them like they're inhumane. And so a lot of them don't want to do that type of work. And so, what do you think the ramifications will be if we continue to incarcerate people, but then they can't retain the staff to, actually stand there and watch them and things like that?
Yeah, the incarcerating more people leads to overcrowded carceral facilities, prisons, and jails.
Which, by the way, is violating their Eighth Amendment because it's Eighth Amendment violation.
It has proven to be on a number of cases, according to the United States Supreme Court, a violation of the Eighth Amendment, which is the protection against cruel and unusual punishment. That has been the case in Louisiana. That has been ruled to be the case on multiple occasions. So that's not you saying that. That is the United States government saying that, just to be clear. Um, and that happens when we have facilities that are over capacity. What happens is that people's rights are violated, and people die, and people are hurt, and so when someone is incarcerated, one way to understand that is that the state or the city, whether it's pretrial detention, the federal government, whatever body is doing that incarceration, whether it's the city, state, or federal government, is taking custodianship of that person. In other words, they are required by law to care for that person. So anything that happens to that person while they are in, what we hear, state custody, is the responsibility of the state. One of the advisory board members that we had for our exhibition, her name is Professor Andrea Armstrong. She's at Loyola University in New Orleans, and is a MacArthur Fellow. And she has a project called Incarceration Transparency. And she has been working for years to track every death that happens behind bars. And I think in Louisiana, I'm trying to remember the exact number, but over the past handful of years, she's, noted over 1,000 deaths. So these are people that the state did not protect or care for when they were in state custody, or under, like I said, it could be perhaps the parish sheriff, right? This happens because the population, it happens for a few reasons. One is just neglect. Two is cost. It is expensive to incarcerate a person. That means to feed and house and care for, provide medical care, and whatever else for a person for the full duration of their incarceration. And so that is a big, in Louisiana, the budget for incarceration for LADOC this year is just under $1 billion. So, that's what the state taxpayers are paying. They're paying $1 billion to incarcerate about 28,000 people. So yeah, I think that it is very dangerous to do this because it is hard to staff these places. It's not a place a lot of people want to work. It traumatizes not just the people that are experiencing incarceration, but the incarcerators, the correctional officers. So it's not. It is very hard to do in a humane and safe manner. And the best way to improve public safety and I wish Andrea was here with me to communicate this because she's really the expert. But is that incarcerate less people,
Mhm. Yeah,
and
that's
to
absolutely right.
and to incarcerate less people and to invest in their care in a way that is more meaningful.
Yeah, invest into communities.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I've been reading. I think that the AP had did an article not too long ago in Louisiana about the geriatric population and how at Angola, it is just the medical unit is disgusting. There's people that's laying there that has flies all over them. They're not changing them. They're not, watching after them. And then, a lot of them have other people that are incarcerated to look after them. I remember this one lady saying how she went to see her brother and, he's basically on his deathbed because they're neglecting him. And when she goes to see him, she basically has to try to take care of him while she's there. And so I think that they might be suing the state of Louisiana for the neglect. But that just goes to show you, and there's numbers that shows that we're incarcerating so many people that we're having to put nursing homes and we have geriatric departments inside the prisons, but they're not getting that medical help that they should be getting that they would get if they were out here. And so, now it's a lot more expensive to incarcerate somebody because just the way, the cost of living outside has went up. So I'm sure, I think North Carolina was at 32,000 per person. And I'm sure we're probably like 40,000 now, maybe even higher with, the way inflation is going. And, that's one thing that I try to talk to a lot of people about, especially on my podcast, is, this is your taxpaying money. Imagine if they took that $1 billion and they put it back in the communities, whether it's schools. I mean, you don't have teachers, highways look horrible. I mean, just imagine what your $1 billion could go
Mm-hmm.
to if we're not taking it to incarcerate people. And having them to really understand this is your hard-earned money. This is not money that the state just gets and just falls out of the sky. This is your hard-earned tax dollars that they're
Right.
taking to incarcerate people, and then they're not rehabilitating them. They're making them worse, and then they're just keeping them until they're about dead. And now we're to the point where we're incarcerating all ages. We're incarcerating children, and you're incarcerating middle age, and now the elderly. And so, because we don't have parole here either, parole was abolished in North Carolina after 1994, so we don't have that either. And so, we do have a lot of elderly people that are currently incarcerated, and a lot of people are starting to get cancer just because of a lot of prisons are environmental hazards. I don't think people understand that, but a lot of them are environmental hazards because, these prisons were built in the 1800s and they have not upgraded them. So you have lead in the paint, you have old pipes that are, that they have in there. So sometimes the water's brown. So it's really an environmental hazard and it's causing a lot of the people incarcerated to get sick. So that means the cost of medical expenses goes up and the care goes down for them. And so I think we lost him. um, I just think it's important that we really understand, that we as taxpayers have to do better with demanding our government to take our money and do better with our money instead of just incarcerating thousands and thousands of people with the money that we work hard for. I think we lost Eric.
Okay. You want to pause and we can try to do it again?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, hold on.
Okay.
people are aging.
Yeah.
People incarcerated population is getting older. Um, that's when I last heard you.
Yeah, just basically saying that um, I think it's important to also educate the public about the importance of knowing where your tax dollars is going and
Yeah.
showing up to these budget hearings that they have to demand that you no longer want your tax money to go towards incarceration, but go towards the community, whether it's schools, teachers, resource centers, recs, and things like that for the children and the families, because we have taken that away, and so now you're getting to the point where you are incarcerating children, middle age, elderly, and so pretty soon the whole United States will be incarcerated, and enslaved, and so that's not something that a lot of us want to see. I mean, I know there's a lot of people now starting to pay attention to criminal justice and really advocate for a change, because now it's not to the point where we're incarcerating Black and brown bodies. It's whoever gets in trouble, whether you're white, Black, brown, orange, you're incarcerated. And so, we're just moving into a totally different direction.
Yeah. And one of our goals for our exhibition was to try to put this history in front of people so that we can have an informed conversation about it, because it's just what you're saying, is that this is our system. We pay for this system. It is supposed to be working for us, the people. That's what the government is supposed to be doing. And we have the ability to impact the system. But we have, people to play a role in that. It requires voting and following the money that's being spent and tax dollars. And one of the things that we pull out for the public in our exhibition is that there are lots of organizations in New Orleans and locally, and I know nationally, and I know in North Carolina, I just don't know their names, but that do amazing work around voter education and policy education. And, you don't have to be the one sitting in the council chamber to be informed.
Mhm.
So we encourage people to talk about what they learn in our exhibition about the carceral system and to be engaged in a way that's meaningful for them, because like you said, in Louisiana, our 2024 DOC budget is 970 plus million, almost $1 billion. In the city of in New Orleans, in the city, there are different ways to count, but we identified about $250 million being spent annually on incarceration, so about 275 million. But we also found a story that really showed the power that people have in affecting how the system operates. So one of the things that's unique to Louisiana is in 1880, as a way to incarcerate more people, the state changed the number of jurors who needed to agree to pass a felony conviction from all of them. And for felony convictions in Louisiana, that's 12 jurors to only 9. So only 9 of 12 needed to agree to pass a felony conviction. And this was written in 1880, and it was done in large part to silence the voices of Black jurors who were newly required to sit on juries per their full citizenship as granted by the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution.
Mhm.
And so what it does, in effect, is incarcerates more people, because you don't need unanimous agreement that this person committed the crime to send somebody to jail. It results in higher number of plea deals, because people know, well, I'm not going to win. I'll just have a plea deal and agree to a conviction that the crime they didn't commit. And it results in higher numbers of convictions. That law was passed in 1880. It goes into the Louisiana State Constitution in 1898. And it continues through the 20th century. There's one little tweak where they go from 9 to 10. So they say, all right, we need 10 jurors out of 12 to agree. And it lasts up until 2017. And what happens in 2017 is that the people of Louisiana voted overwhelmingly on an amendment to the state constitution requiring unanimous juries for a felony conviction. So we include this at the end of the exhibition because I think it's really important as a reminder that we have agency in how this plays out. Of course, a tremendous amount of work had to be done to bring this up to the point that it was a state referendum and it was an amendment and we passed it, but the people have power to make change, and can change these systems in directions that are agreed upon by large numbers of people to be better. So we made that change in Louisiana. I think it's a reminder of, hopefully a moment of hope and a reminder that it doesn't have to be the way it is. That law could have just remained on the books, but the people of the state decided they wanted to change it, and so it changed.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know we actually just had a case heard a few months ago where a guy had an all-white jury and there were no people of color on the jury. And so that's how we were able to convict a lot of people in North Carolina, was having an all-white jury. I think I want to say maybe we had a law that passed that kind of changed that, to where, they have to have a mixture of races on the jury. But then you also have to go back to the jury instructions, because I've seen, some coercion with the jury, and the jury instructions and the judges making them go back. And, if they find somebody not guilty, they make them go back. And there's just been, other coercive things to actually find somebody guilty when they're not guilty. So, we just have to really keep our eyes glued on, the system and, how we can change it. I know that I'm an advocate, and what I did was, there was a guy in North Carolina that was facing the death penalty, capital murder, and there was absolutely no evidence that he had did it. And so, I just advocated for him. Went to all his court dates, and we did a public presentation with the family and let the family humanize him as a person. And I think that had a lot to do with him being found not guilty, because if I would have been there to advocate and, us really have his family on and do press conferences about the situation, it was a really good chance that the small city he was in, that he would have been found guilty of capital murder and, of course, did not commit that murder. So I, try to let people know it's important that you show up to these people's court dates, whether you know them or not. If you are a true advocate and really want to change the justice system, it starts with the day they go to court, being there to make sure that they're having fair proceedings, because a lot of times there's not fair proceedings. I know, as we see now with the Young Thug trial, all the prosecutorial misconduct that's starting to be shown because it's televised. And so we all can see the harms that, the courts and the system are causing people. And so we have to keep our eyes glued on that and really keep bringing that to the forefront to show that the system is not what we were told or what we thought, it was there to protect, keep us safe and protect us and keep the community safe. It's doing more harm than it's doing good. So that's, one thing that I really trying to hone in on. But as a historian, what do you hope that your work, how do you hope your work can change the trajectory of enslaved bodies in the carceral system?
I mean, we had a couple goals we set out with this project. I think one of them was to, humanize everybody in the story that we're telling. I think that's really incredibly important, is that all the people are treated as people. And because this is a story about people on all the sides of the story. So we wanted to start there, and we wanted to use, people first language, and we wanted our visitors to come out of it respecting the humanity of everyone involved. I think that's a really important goal. And I hope we're moving the needle somewhat in terms of how we tell stories in the museum, and how the visitors who come to our museum receive and understand stories about the past. We really hope that our visitors will leave our exhibition experience and talk to the people in their life about what they've learned and have a conversation. It's like I'm saying that we're all implicit in how the system operates. Well, if that's the case, and if anyone doesn't like how the system operates, let's talk about it. That's a step towards making it something that might be more in line with what more people would like. So we're really hoping to spark that conversation. We have tours, dialogue tours that are all around getting a group of visitors into the exhibition that may or may not know each other and having them talk to each other to sponsor group learning about the subject and about their experiences and ideas around it in the space so that they can learn together and move forward. I hope in some small way that the exhibition can lead us towards a more humane future. And I think, that's something to strive for always in all of the work we do. So, yeah, in some small way, if we could do that, I would be thrilled. And I think, that's one of the goals of public history, which is what I do generally, is that, if we can know more about ourselves, we can be more proactive going forward. So, yeah, I hope we can accomplish some of that.
I think it's wonderful, what you guys are doing and just showing the history of, slavery now, from then now until how it turns into incarceration. So tell our viewers, where your exhibition is located, just in case, because we have listeners from all over listening. I think we actually have some from New Orleans or from the state of Louisiana listening. Tell us, any information about the exhibit, the location and, how people can get to it if they actually want to come see it and be a part of this great
Yeah.
thing that you.
Yeah. So our exhibition, Captive State, Louisiana and the Making of Mass Incarceration, is on display until January 19th. It's at 520 Royal Street in the French Quarter in New Orleans. It is free admission. We're open every day but Monday. You don't need to make an appointment. You can just walk right in if you're visiting town and come and see us. The tours I mentioned, they're called Piecing It Together. Those run 10 to 11:30 Thursday through Sunday. We do ask you to register for those because we want to make sure we know what the group size is going through those tours. There is a $5 suggested donation to join a tour. And you can register for that at hnoc.org. You can see more about the exhibition there. And, again, that's at 520 Royal Street for people that haven't been to New Orleans but want to go. It's in the French Quarter. Sierra, if you find yourself in New Orleans this fall or winter, I would love to show you around too. So I hope you can make it down and some of your listeners can too. And thanks so much for inviting me on today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's been a pleasure and it's been a very good conversation. I'm sure our listeners will really appreciate this conversation and the work that you guys are doing in Louisiana to change the slavery and, hopefully we'll eventually abolish it, we hope.
Yeah, I know a number of places have put that up, just getting that language out of the Constitution. It's in state constitutions as well, and seems about time in the 21st century. So
yeah, we have to work together to change that. I mean, like you said, we have the power to do that, and we really have to work together to change that because it's time for a change. It's time for a new song, as they say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so
right.
much.
Thank you, Eric. Take care.
You too. All right.
Bye.